Welcome to the Steam Next Fest. In this video we're taking a look at the data, the numbers, not the wish lists or anything like that, to see the most popular, the most played games available for free at the Steam Next Fest. And without any further ado, let's jump into number one. And here we have it, literally number one. This is Dark and Darker. Dark and Darker is a dungeon crawler at its core, but it brings in a wonderful multiplayer layer in this PvPvE adventure. The levels, as you can imagine, are dungeons themselves, and we are tasked as players to choose a class and move through, loot the rewards, slay the enemies, and hopefully come out with some better gear for the next dungeon. I was really impressed by Dark and Darker, not just the fact that it had an Australian server, thank you very much, or its really clever loot gathering mechanics, but more importantly, it was the world that it built. It felt to me a little bit like Dark Souls multiplayer, layered on top of maybe some of the more familiar multiplayer experiences I've had on Steam, the likes of Rust or something similar. And here of course I mean purely by how the game moves and feels, rather than how it plays, because in terms of gameplay, Dark and Darker is a step above the rest. The levels that it throws you into are, as the name would suggest, kind of scary. Combat itself, as you can see by the gameplay, is fairly difficult, but if you can band together a motley crew, or if you dare, go out on your own, I think you'll have a lot of fun in Dark and Darker. Dark and Darker is the most popular game in the Steam Next Fest, by the way, not just in terms of wish lists or player counts, but across the board. If you're looking for something new, fun and exciting to play, Dark and Darker might very well be the experience for you, but of course it's a unique genre, PvP, multiplayer, first person. We've got more to take a look at if it isn't quite your cup of tea. And moving into the next game, this is Voidtrain. Voidtrain is the most popular open world survival game on the list. Every year in the Steam Next Fest we see more and more open world survival games because of course they're incredibly popular. Play it alone, play it with friends. I think it's the exploration and the building element that draws people in. Voidtrain sort of adds to that a bit more. It adds in a first-person shooter and survival element, but the thing it does the best actually is its storytelling and world building. I was really impressed by the immersive visuals, the audio design, and the storytelling. It made me feel not just like I was playing your standard kind of survival base building game, but also that I was playing a really story-driven, narrative-driven experience at the same time. It goes not just for its relatively impressive cutscenes, its very easy tutorials, but the world that it builds as a whole. It keeps you interested in the story, but also reminds you that this is a crafting, survival, base-building game at its core. The next game on my list is one that I didn't even think I was going to add, yet it remains the third most popular title. Yet another Zombie Survivors is its name. And if you think that doesn't even make grammatical sense, why would I play this silly game? Well, here's the story. They've made quite a few Zombie Survivors kind of games. This one, releasing in Q2 of 2023 from Awesome Game Studio, is of course yet another RPG roguelite action game. Bullet hell is how Steam summarizes it, and of course that'd be right. But this one does something a little bit different. And as I equip myself with these saw blades that are flying around me, here's the first of many to come, I was struck personally by how much I enjoyed yet another Zombie Survivors. Is it simple? Yes. Is it another roguelite in a Steam Next Fest filled with roguelite? Yes. But man, it kept me interested. Every sort of 30 seconds or so, depending on how much money you're collecting and how many zombies you're slaying, you'll be prompted with one of three power-ups, a new card. You can choose to add new recruits into your inner circle, or upgrade the troops that you already have. Each one, of course, has a different class. In this case, I started as the tank, and I've pulled in an engineer and eventually a couple of other folks to give me a hand. Obviously, the game itself is fairly easy to control. WASD and a mouse, choose your upgrades and you're away. Yet its simple, smooth, and interesting gameplay kept me coming back for more. Yet another Zombie Survivors is a brilliant little RPG roguelike game, and I'd highly recommend you check it out. It actually doesn't surprise me after playing it that it's ranked at number 3. Moving on to the next game on my list, and if you're a regular fan of the channel, this could very well be the best one for you. This is Darkest Dungeon 2. Darkest Dungeon 2 is the most popular strategy game at the Steam Next Fest by player counts. It's a turn-based tactics game. Also, interestingly, much like Dark and Darker, another dungeon crawler. Is 2023 the year of the dungeon crawler? Maybe, but I think it's also a great year for turn-based tactics games. And that is, as you can see, what Darkest Dungeon is at its core. In the story, you ride along in your cart, Gran Turismo style, choosing which path to take down a procedurally generated rogue-like world. Then, once you stop at a stop like I have here, you'll likely be prompted to take down enemies. Or potentially, you could be researching, trading, that kind of thing. Once you've equipped your equipment, found your enemies, and moved through into the level, obviously the game plays out in a turn-based tactics style. As you can see, each one of my characters have different attacks that they can use, some of them more support-based, others much more aggressive, and I'm tasked with taking down the enemies. Turn by turn, I strike and they strike. A simple formula for turn-based tactics, delivered in a really interesting way. Not really a deck builder at its core, but because it has such a strong strategy layer underpinning it, in the worlds and the procedurally generated targets, I think that Darkest Dungeon 2 does a great job at capturing not just what strategy gamers, loot hunters, and dungeon crawlers would like, but also there's an RPG element here, a roguelite element. And I think this is a wonderful experience. I also have a full video covering it on my channel already, if you'd like to check out some more Darkest Dungeon 2. Now, let's move on to the new title on the list. This is Meet Your Maker, scheduled for release on the 5th of April 2023. Meet Your Maker is another, granted, base building game. Action, strategy, and co-op all melded into one. This is a really fascinating one though, because Meet Your Maker, in a post-apocalyptic and first world setting, prides itself on the fact that every level is designed by players. The game fundamentally is about building and then raiding. Build your base or your outpost, design mazes, perhaps lay traps with enemies, and then go and raid someone else's. Of course, underpinning that, there's sort of an underlying theme of gearing up, right? Finding loot, finding friends, and ultimately building to something better and better still. I really like the fact that Meet Your Maker has focused in and really driven in on the fact that it is a raiding game. It said, you know, Rust is great and these other titles are great and they do wonderful things, but we want to focus on making this all about raiding and base building experiences. I'm keen to see more of that one. I'm also keen to see more of the next item on our list. This is Ravenbound, and if you're not too busy playing Hogwarts Legacy, you might be interested in this for a single-player experience. Ravenbound is probably the single most narrative-driven, one-player-only experience on the list. Ravenbound again brings in some roguelite elements, though an underlying theme for 2023 it would seem, and punches it into an action world. Ravenbound's combat is very fast-paced, and I would encourage you to try it out. It's also important to note that the roguelite elements come through in its point of difference, with permadeath and permanent progression both playing a part in Ravenbound's world, helping of course to set not only that slightly Dark Souls sort of hardcore element to it, but also bring in that roguelike factor, which I think personally helps to keep it just that little bit more interesting. The enemies themselves are quite diverse, and there are sort of different approaches to combat, whether it be ranged, melee, or something else, help to keep Ravenbound a fairly interesting experience. My personal playtime with it is fairly limited though, so I'll leave my own personal reflections on it here, other than to say that I think that Ravenbound is likely one of the best single-player experiences in the Steam Next Fest entirely, and I would encourage you to check it out. Speaking of single-player experiences, actually, it brings me through to the last game on my list. One that I was honestly a little bit surprised that I would be adding, but looking through the numbers, it was clear that it was popular. This, everybody, is System Shock. Now, System Shock is an action game. It's an adventure game. It also brings in a couple of genres that we haven't yet talked about. Horror, sci-fi, and if the popular Steam-defined, user-defined tags are anything to go by, it's also an immersive sim. Well, how does it play then, Jumbo? Come on, get to the point. Alright. System Shock. This is a fully fledged remaster of an original game from 1994. That's right. It combines the shooter gameplay, of course, and tries to bring it through into a bit more of a modern setting. System Shock is a game driven by Shodan, a psychotic AI that's taken control of a station and turned the crew into cyborgs. She plans to do the same to Earth, and of course it's your job to stop her. It features lots of things, but Mainly, it's all about its sci-fi setting. It's about facing off against a rogue AI, improving skills. There is a linear story, of course, inside of this remastered 1994 title, but the gameplay itself is very impressive, and if you're looking to scratch that classic itch, that Doom itch, in a modern setting, then this is the game for you. Thank you so much for joining me in today's video, likely my final one for the Steam Next Fest. I've really enjoyed covering all of the titles, and if you've found a gem that I haven't, let me know below. I'll see you next time.